Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more.
Hello, and welcome to our next podcast. I'm your host, Ron Fortier. Our podcast features local contemporary artists, art industry professionals, scholars, genealogists, and art lovers. It's brought to you in part by theartistindex.com. The Artist Index is a local resource for artists, art professionals, and art lovers. And I'll let our guest introduce himself for the record. Hi, what's your name?
Good morning, Ron. How are you?
Good, thank you.
My name is Peter Pereira. I'm a photojournalist, staff photographer at the Standard Times, represented worldwide by a set of agencies.
That's fantastic. How do you spell Pereira? Because I think people tend to put in 3 R's.
Yeah, well, Pereira is very Portuguese, and it actually means pear tree. So it's spelled Pereira.
Okay. It's important because, every the beginning of every podcast, I ask people how they pronounce the name or how they spell the name, because you'd be surprised the stories I've heard from the most simple names.
Of course.
And how long have you been doing this?
I've been a professional photojournalist for 22 years.
22 years.
Yeah.
All with the Standard Times or South Coast Today?
Well, yeah. I mean, the Standard Times, I've been a staffer there for 20 years. But before then, I worked for the Associated Press. And then before that, I was a computer engineer. So, yeah, it's been a whirlwind. But it's something that I wouldn't trade for anything else.
Now, let me ask you a question. Do you consider yourself an artist?
Well, that's an interesting question because, I mean, art is such a broad term, right? And for me to say, yeah, I'm an artist would be maybe offensive to some people who might consider the traditional arts. They might classify only the traditional arts as true art and everything else as a fringe or something that might be artistic but not necessarily art. Now, do I consider myself an artist? That's a very tough question. I consider myself a storyteller for sure. Now, how you perceive my images, that's really up to you. Whatever you classify is, quite frankly, irrelevant to me.
Well, photography and photographers have had this debate, so to speak, ever since Niels Bohr invented the camera, and it's really been kind of interesting. It wasn't until the 50s, I'm blanking out on his name, where he started doing this incredible photography. Well, another one was Man Ray. That one I remember.
Yeah.
Man Ray was the granddaddy of fashion photography, and so many other aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some groundbreaking photographers through the course of history, and I think you might be alluding to like Henrique Cartier-Bresson or something like that.
Yes.
But again, I mean, to me, it's really irrelevant. What I want to do is I want you to look at a photograph and I want you to experience something or go to a place that you might never have been or might never go to and hopefully invoke some kind of reaction. That could be the story that I'm showing you, or it could be, or it could conjure up some memory that you might have had. But the key is that as a photojournalist, I work within certain ethics and certain protocols that other artists might not have. Whereas, for instance, a typical photographer has full control over the image that he's creating, the photojournalist has absolutely no control at all, and that's the beauty of photojournalism. We don't pose anything, we don't stage things, we simply capture what it is that we see in front of us. That does not mean that we don't capture it with our own sense of seeing the world, so that there's some kind of lineage from the first photograph that you see taken by a specific photographer to the most recent one you might have seen by the same photographer, and there is a certain style associated to all of those photographs, and that is the only thing photographically or artistically that we can place in our own photographs is how do we see the world.
So it's all the eye, all the lens, And as a photojournalist, do you have any control over the editing of the shot?
Well, I mean, the editing starts right when you take a photo. I mean, a lot of people are like, well, do you crop photos? Of course. You crop the entire rest of the world. The moment you zoom into something,
Right.
or you're choosing to ignore the rest of the world. So, yeah, I mean, and as far as editing, it goes pretty much something like this. You might cover an event, or you might see something interesting and you photograph it, and then you select from the 100, 200, 1,000 photos that you take of something. You select the ones that are stylistically maybe the best, but especially the ones that tell the story the best.
Right. Of course, now it's got to go to the photo editor.
Right.
I'm not going to talk about your personal relationship
right.
with photo editors, but in general,
Yeah.
Photo editors, it's like pushing string, or I mean,
It depends. It depends on where in your career ladder you are. If you're just starting out and basically you're basically rowing against the tide, because what's happening is that an editor expects you to go to an event to cover something. They don't expect you to cover an event the way they might see it, but they want you to come back with certain standardized images, right? So if you're talking about a press conference, they might want photos of a guy standing at a podium, which photographically is probably the least interesting thing you can possibly show.
Right.
So there comes a point in one's career where then the editor trusts the judgment that you have. Okay, I hate using the word as an artist, okay? They trust the fact that what you're doing is you're showing an event in a completely interesting way, an event that it visually is not very interesting by itself.
Right.
I'll give you an example. Last week, I decided to go photograph. Again, the editor isn't even asking me to do these things anymore. But I like challenging myself. So there was a committee meeting about where the New Bedford public school system is going and the new tactics that they're going to use and new ideas.
Right.
So I decided to go, not because I thought there was anything visually interesting, because there wasn't.
Yeah.
Technically, it's just the superintendent, the mayor speaking at a podium. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
But the editors know if I'm going to go, I'm not going to come back a photo of those two guys standing there. There's nothing wrong with them. We all know what they look like.
Right.
So I came back and it was a really interesting shot. You could see somebody had set up a tripod with a cell phone and they were recording the entire event. So I shot it. And you see the head of the superintendent through this tiny little gap. And on the phone, you see the entire superintendent. And then you see all these little red elements that tie the whole picture together.
Yeah.
And then, of course, with an interesting headline like Thinking Outside the Box, then it's so much more than just a press conference. And that only comes after a certain period in your career where you've proven time and time again that you're able to come back and see the world a little bit differently.
I know this may sound strange, but is there an intermittent or sometimes a constant little voice in your head that if you don't listen to it, because there's so many times where I'm not a professional photographer, I'm walking with a dog and I see something and I can't get my cell phone out fast enough, and it's like, dang, nobody's ever going to believe this thing.
Right.
It's those moments. I mean, you lose them.
Yeah,
shoot them or lose them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Especially like I said in photojournalism, we have no control. So you either got or you didn't.
Yeah.
And the worst thing you can do is like, oh man, let me just try to recreate that. That is complete no-no. I mean, the simple truth is, if you're prepared and you're seeing the world through a constant moving lens, then you're going to get it. You're going to get something, okay? But there's also that little voice, like in the back of my head, always, like, what have I done today? What interesting photograph have I taken today? And maybe a lot of people don't have that. Maybe they're waiting for the images. Maybe they're waiting for the moments. I'm always out there looking for moments. I mean, even on a rainy day, I walked around this morning and I was freezing. I'm completely soaked.
Yeah.
And there's a time you ask yourself, why on earth am I doing this? I could just be in my car, driving around until I miraculously came upon something, right?
Right.
But the simple truth is, unless you're out there, boots on the ground, you're walking around, you're looking for things, but you don't know what that thing is. But that's the beauty of photojournalism, especially. It's unlike any other type of photography. When you're a fashion photographer, right, you know what the client is, you know who the models are, you know where the location is. Everything is ultra controlled. Yeah. Everything.
Right.
To me, I have no appeal to that. I could do that easily.
Yeah.
But it doesn't appeal to me. I love the challenge of finding what I don't know exists.
Yeah, for some reason, I mean, I always have these things happen on this show. It's like things pop into my head, and I was thinking about listening to what you were saying, and all of a sudden, Ivan Smirnov, the Russian comedian, I don't know if he's still around, but he had this one part of his routine where he said, in this country, in your country, he says, you go out looking for party. He says, in my country, party come looking for you. So it's almost like, oh my God, it's like with the photographer, if you're going to be out there waiting for it to come to you,
yeah,
you'd be waiting like
you'd
last
be waiting
night.
Forever.
Do you have a dog?
No.
Okay, I was going to say, because if I were a photographer, every time I would bring my dog out, that's when I would bring my camera as well, because last night, the moon's not completely full. There was a ring around, it was a tiny moon. It was about the size of a garbanzo bean in the sky, so to speak, scale-wise. So there was that ring around it. And then I looked, and there was a larger ring. I mean, a huge ring around the moon. It was a beautiful shot.
Yeah, like a dog ring or whatever.
But unfortunately, obviously, you can't take those kinds of shots with an iPhone.
Yeah, but see, like the example that you just used is a perfect example of how you can anticipate something that hasn't actually happened, right? So, for instance, specifically speaking about the moon, okay, every February there's I think they call it the winter moon. Sometimes they have other names for it. But ironically, this coming weekend is what's known as the supermoon, which is only going to happen like 4 times in the next 10 years, right?
Right.
And it's happening this weekend. Now, as a photojournalist, I'm thinking maybe there's an interesting shot there. So yes, I've already looked at the weather, and unfortunately it's going to be cloudy and raining all weekend.
Right.
So I might not get any photos of the supermoon. But even though I don't know if there's going to be a good photo, there are days where you can plan ahead what could potentially happen. Right? And I remember covering the photograph on the supermoon in 2016. And again, I knew the supermoon was going to happen. It was huge. I didn't really know where it was going to line up, so I ended up, for whatever reason, going to Fort Taber Park, and there it was, and it started rising, but the only way to get something really interesting, because people were walking on that huge causeway out there, was if I went in the water, which is exactly what I did, and I got totally soaked. I was like up to my chest in water, because the only way to line up people walking on that as the moon was coming up was for me to be in the water. Now, those folks had no clue what I was taking a picture of.
Right.
But the next day, that particular photo was not only in the Standard Times, but it was in the LA Times. It was all over the country because it was a really interesting photo. Yeah. Again, planning without actually knowing.
Exactly. Because, I mean, I remember, the biggest moon I've ever seen was crossing over the Braga Bridge. And, this thing was huge.
Yeah, it was probably on that day.
Yeah, it was huge. And you're in traffic. It's like, oh, what do I do now? You know?
Right.
And it's funny, too, because of the wetness. As you know, I lived in Figueira da Foz in Boarcos. And you're from Gala, which is just
across the river.
Across the river, so to speak. And I got mesmerized by the water there. And I thought it was being, pretty astute, because I was counting my waves like a surfer would. And so now I'm at the edge. I'm counting them, and I'm going into the surf, but as far back as the water recedes. Now I'm mesmerized by this roller coming in.
Yep.
And then I realize that sucker's not going to stop. It's coming. It's a rogue. I miscounted, or it's a rogue.
Right.
Now I've got my backpack on.
Uh-oh.
And I got a strap hanging, and I'm crouched down, and I step back to get up. I step on the strap.
No, you didn't go down.
I went completely on my back, holding my phone up in the air, and people were looking at me like, "What the heck?"
Yeah, what's going on? Right.
But yeah, that happens.
Yeah,
that happens. And some of the shots over there are just
that's the beauty of going to a different location. Like Figueira da Foz is a perfect example where the sun always rises into the ocean, right?
Yeah.
Sets into the ocean.
Yeah.
While here, the sun always sets into land.
Yeah.
But it always rises from the ocean.
Exactly.
So there's always positives and negatives. But like, for instance, when you go there, which I did last year, and to the person who lives there, the sun descending into the ocean is nothing new. It's what they see every day, right? Mm-hmm. No different than us when we're making our way down William Street. We look at this amazing Best Bank building, with these Ionic capitals that look like it belongs in Greece or Rome, we completely take it for granted.
Yeah.
Like, seriously take it for granted.
Yeah.
And this morning I was in the rain looking at this thing and I'm like, this is a pretty epic structure, right? But when you go somewhere else, the things that everyone takes for granted, and you take images of that, and then they look at them and they're like, wow, that's in my neighborhood and I never saw that.
Yeah.
That's when it's really
see.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting because there's so many examples. For example, being an artist, so we're both visual people. Let's put it that way. And you drive a route every single day.
Yep.
Then you walk that route.
Oh, yeah.
And then you go, I've been by here 1,000 times. I've never seen that house ever. As God is my witness, I've never seen that house.
Exactly.
Well,
that's what I was alluding to.
Yeah.
Like, I could have stayed in my car.
Yeah.
But by walking, I'm forcing myself to take, to look at things differently, to take in my surroundings in a different way. And it could be something as simple as a raindrop coming down a window, or it could be like, oh wow, look at this, they're putting a new place in here. Like, I was walking again today, I was walking around downtown, and there was a guy removing the Chamber of Commerce letters from the building,
from the old building,
and the inside was completely,
they took
torn
all those
out.
walls
Everything
out.
is gone.
Yeah.
And you've never noticed how long that space actually is because it was subdivided by things. Now, if you're driving in a car, there's no way you're going to take that in. But the first question is, okay, what's coming back here? What's coming in now? So, yeah, that only happens when you get out of your comfort zone and you go and walk, for instance.
Yeah.
Or ride your bike. Or
exactly.
Or whatever.
Walking with the dog at Fort Phoenix. Just walking down the street sometimes. I mean, there's so many opportunities. And so what is it about artists or photographers, same thing, visual people, that makes you want to catch that moment?
I think in my case, it's pretty simple, really. I mean, I came to the conclusion a long, long time ago, and it actually happened in Portugal when I must have been 5 years old. And my my dad's cousin, who had went to visit us, we were still living there, he was a photographer, and he wanted to go visit this castle, Moro Velho, right, which is not too far from Figueira. And he brought his cameras, and I talked him into letting me, carry his cameras for him.
Right.
So he was taking photos or whatever, and a couple of years later, I came to visit my grandma, who lived in New Bedford since forever. And he had a dark room in the same house on the bottom level. And he was developing the photos that he shot earlier of me on a little bicycle. And I think it hit me right there that was a visual record for all time. It hit me that I'm always going to be a little kid. In that photo forever. Right? So I started looking at photography much more than just visual elements of pretty places. To me, it was always like, wow, I'm going to know what I looked like when I was 7 forever through a photograph. So when I go out and I'm capturing something, it's always with the idea that this is a visual record of our time. So 2020 is going to be defined partially by the photographs that I take, the paintings, the drawings, the photos you take. That's the simple truth. I mean, we all go and we look at historical photos of New Bedford, for instance, right? Nobody asks who took the photo, but the photo is a representation of what was happening back then. And that's how I see. That's why I want to capture things. That's why I want to tell stories.
For my when I was teaching art history, I would play this segment from the 21st century, which is kind of weird because we are in the 21st century now, but it was a PBS production. It was 100 Years of Photography. And they open up this thing with, it's a school cafeteria, and these people look stunned and dazed, and they're wandering around, and there's this mother and son, and the cafeteria tables have photographs, covering the tops of them, and they're a mess. They're wet. These people just experienced a tornado. And one of the first things that they're doing, is looking for photographs.
That's right. Those are the memories.
The pyramids weren't built to preserve bodies. They were built to preserve memory.
Right.
And you say that. I remember my granddaughter. I received. I got my father's 8mm film, and we had it digitized. Actually, my brother shot it on a wall, and he videotaped it, and so it was, it wasn't perfect.
Right.
But my granddaughter wanted to know what I was doing. I was watching it, and she came, sat on my lap, and I started crying like a baby.
Yeah.
And she said, "What's the matter?" I said, "They're all dead.
Yeah.
They're all dead, but I can feel, I can smell that place.
Yeah.
I can hear the sounds of their voices. I know the temperature
Right.
of that day. I can feel the sun on my face, and it's like an amazing
Yeah.
experience."
That's really the beauty of photography, because photography speaks a universal language, you see. And I'm not using the word the problem with other art forms. That's not a problem at all. The
No.
big distinction between photography and other art forms is that photography appeals to every single human who's ever opened their eyes, right? Without any interpretation. So I can be moved by a Leonardo painting or a Caravaggio because of the beautiful light that he would use in his paintings.
Right.
I might not be connected religiously to any of what I see.
Right.
However, if you look at a photograph, and it's a photograph of hungry kids in Haiti, or homeless children in India, which I've done both. You have no choice but to be moved by what you see.
There's a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you disassociate yourself emotionally? How do you...
Oh, it's hard.
Is it an out-of-body kind of thing that you are just going through, not motions, as a photographer, you're going through the motions as a human. In other words, there's two of you. There's the photographer that has to record what's going on, and there's the other part of you who's sort of like...
No, I understand
Does
what
that
you're
make
saying.
sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And in my case, I think they're both connected. I'll give you an example. I've, over the course, since 2001, when we went to war with Iraq and so on, I've been covering a bunch of funerals of guys who've never made it back from those conflicts. And let me tell you something. Every single time I get emotionally moved. And there are many times where I put the camera to my face, not to take a photo, but to hide what's happening with my eyeballs, right?
Yeah.
And I'll use the word pride. I take pride in the fact that I don't try to become the stoic, monolithic beast that just cares about the photos. I don't. I truly care about what it is that I'm photographing. Some of the places I've been to photograph people in very difficult conditions, I go with only one hope, and that's to tell their story. I don't go there to figure, I'm going to make this much money, or I'm going to sell it to this publication or whatever. It's always been about telling the story. So, and I understand what you're saying, and that might be a misconception that photojournalists especially are disconnected in the sense that they're trying so hard to get good photos that they're actually not feeling any of the emotion that's in front of them. I would say that the vast majority of them, that's the reason they got into photojournalism to begin with. It is to tell the stories, and it is to be moved.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't expect anybody to be like, who took the photo? Oh, wow, maybe he went through the same emotions of what he saw. But I can tell you, I've seen the best that humanity has to offer, and I've seen the very worst that humanity has to offer. And they both touch me in their own way. And you live with scars.
Oh yeah. One of my brothers lives in Landstuhl, and he was working at the base hospital there, where in fact that's where a lot of those soldiers that are suffering from concussion wounds or injuries were shipped to. But he said when he first started working there, it was very, very difficult walking the hallways. He would see what used to be guys, he said, and women.
Right.
And I said, what do you mean used to be? He said, there's not much left of them. And I could be repulsed. He says, so then I decided I was going to screw up my courage, swallow, and I was going to look them directly in the eye and smile at them, no matter how much it was affecting me.
Right.
And so, I can imagine that kind of thing. Have you taken that iconic photo? I mean, you might have taken several for...
I mean,
And you know which ones I'm talking about.
No,
It's like the Iwo Jima one. I mean, those or the execution
the
one.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because a lot of times I'm asked, like, what's my favorite photo that I've ever taken, right? Which you could claim is along the lines of what you're asking.
Yeah.
And I always say the same exact thing. My favorite photo is the one I'm going to take tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Because, and I say that not because I haven't taken some really interesting photos that you can make a genuine claim that reached a lot of people. You could actually claim that they were global, right?
Yeah.
But if I think to myself, if I start relying on the fact that, yes, okay, I took XYZ photo and it changed this or it helped that, then I might not be as hungry tomorrow to keep on doing it. And that's why I always remind myself, don't count on what you've already done, but force yourself to do more. Mm-hmm. There's always more. The world's an awfully big place.
Yeah.
I mean, I've taken some images, like for instance, I'll give you an example so that I don't totally skirt around your question, right? Quite a few years ago, there was a big raid in New Bedford, right, with illegal immigrants that were working at the Blanco, right? Yeah. And over 200 were taken. I didn't know what was going on until I saw a motorcade of, what looked like secret police. I actually thought
unmarked cars
going into town. So I decided to turn around to see where they were going. And then I ended up witnessing this whole thing, right? And that night, the whole entire community didn't know what happened to these people. They took them away and whatever. So a lot of the community that was related to the people that were taken away decided to meet at the basement of the church, the Our Lady of Guadalupe. Mm-hmm. So I went there, and there was mass confusion, and I took a photograph of this little girl. She was crying because they didn't know what happened to the mom, right? And we ran that photo, and the AP took that photo, and it ran all over the country. That was one of many photos that I shot that were running everywhere. Mm-hmm. Ironically, the next day when that photo ran, it also ran, by the way, in Guatemala, which is where this family was from. The President Bush was in Guatemala at the time. Mm-hmm. And he was meeting with the president of Guatemala, and the president of Guatemala turns to President Bush and says, tell me what's happening to my people in New Bedford. He had seen the photo.
Yeah.
Make a long story short, a few months later, I get a call from the Washington Post. They're like, hey, did you take a picture of this little girl crying, whatever? I'm like, yeah, I mean, that was months ago. What's up? He's like, do you know that people are marching on Capitol with your photo as huge posters to change immigration reform? I'm like, no, I didn't, because I don't know where they got the photo.
Yeah.
So it turns out that thousands of people had turned this photo that I shot into the movement, almost like the Afghan girl, the famous Afghan girl.
You just read my mind, yeah.
Right, because that's what the Washington Post actually called me about, and that was the analogy that they have.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, if you go on the Washington Post website and you do a search for my name, you're going to see the story.
Yeah.
So you could say that was, I'm not saying that was a career-defining photo by any stretch of the imagination, but that proves the idea that a photograph can have huge impact.
Right, and it could also have a negative impact
on
you as a career, because you'll never climb that height again, that kind of thing. And
it could be, yeah.
And you keep grappling,
right?
Because everybody.
No, in this case, think about the repercussions after the story ran. Yeah. After the story ran, I had many calls from different senators who wanted to use my photos to try to change immigration law. Right. Now, keep something in mind. I'm an immigrant myself. So it was really interesting to see the progression of something like that, Yeah. But again, it wasn't like someone asked me and decided I'm going to give them the photo. Yeah. They saw the photo. They were moved by what they saw. I have no idea how they got the photo. And then they started marching using this girl as a way to change something.
Unfortunately, nothing has changed a heck of a lot since then.
Right. So,
and we both come from families of immigrants.
Of course.
And it was different, and it's a whole nother topic for another day. But
the only thing we can do as photojournalists is we can only but photograph and tell the stories we see. Then it's up to the person to decide whatever it is that they want to take from it, and that's really important to distinguish. So that's why, regardless of what it is that I'm seeing, I don't take a political angle on anything. I simply document it. Then it's up to the viewer, the reader, to distinguish what it is that they're seeing. But that's the beauty of photography, you see.
Have you ever had the totally opposite reaction from the reaction that you had?
Of course.
People looked at the photo and they took it as something totally different from what you were attracted to?
Ironically, in the same series of events.
Really?
A few days later, I went to this other guy's house who didn't know where the wife was.
Yeah.
And he had 2 little kids. So I walk in and this guy's bawling. He is literally bawling. He doesn't know what to do with himself.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm photographing him, whatever. I hung out. I left. The pictures ran in the paper. And it was basically him crying. And I had hate mail from a guy claiming that I had used a teardropper to put tears on this.
The tearjerker to...
Yeah.
an eyedropper.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So that just shows you that, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
No matter how impartial you are. No matter how much of simply a storyteller you are. It can polarize people, and people can get mad over something that they refuse to admit exists.
Yeah, we got a lot of that going on now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's funny, when I interviewed Pete Souza for Artscope magazine, I told him, I said, I'm preparing for this because this is a big interview for me. And comes to find out, he was a year behind me in high school, and then we started, and then he's got loosened up and everything, but I said, I hope I'm going to ask you 2 questions that nobody has ever asked you before in interviews. And he's like, I doubt it.
Right.
So I basically said, you have to walk a specific line as the president has to because because of who he is and the color of this man.
Right.
That line is very, very, very narrow. And I said, what was it like? I mean, what was your intent? And he said, I had no intent. I'm a photographer. I'm there to chronicle his life as it happened with no
preconceived ideas.
No preconceived ideas. He said, but what I saw was a decent human being.
Right.
And that was a family man, and I saw all this stuff, and it was my duty to shoot it as I saw it.
That's all you can. That's all as a photo. I mean, I'll give you another example, right? That is exactly with those lines.
Yeah.
Where you just want to document things. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
Regardless of how people like it or not, it's what you see.
Well, you're at a wedding.
Right.
Okay, and the bridesmaid's drunk as a skunk. I mean,
it is what it is.
You didn't make her a drunk,
right? Oh, I'll give you another example. For instance, when I went to Portugal, we know that bullfighting is a really contentious issue all over Europe, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So I went there.
To the ring, yeah.
To the ring.
Yeah, in Figueira, yeah.
And I photographed not the bullfight itself, but a specific set, which is the furcage, right? Mm-hmm. And these guys are getting destroyed by these bulls.
We call in Portuguese furcados, but in Spanish it's picadores, isn't it?
Well, no, they don't have furcage in Spain.
They don't have furcage? No.
The furcado is a set of like between 8 and 10 guys, and the first guy basically lets the bull charge at him, and then he'll grab him by the horns.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So they're kind of trying to suck his strength out or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So the idea is, some people might think, well, you must surely love bullfighting because you photographed it. Well, no. I photographed it so you can see it. It's that simple.
Yeah.
So then you have people, well, bullfighting shouldn't exist. And the other people still like, well, bullfighting is a tradition. It doesn't matter to me. I only photographed what existed in 2019 in July in Figueira.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then people look at the photos and the 90% of them are stunned that these people are crazy enough to let a bull charge at them, right?
Yeah.
But that is the beauty of photography.
Yeah. You're not there to write history. You're just there to record it as it happens.
Exactly.
In a lot of actualities, it's more truthful than the written word, because they say history is written by the winners.
Right.
There was one photograph, and I don't think it was you, and it wouldn't matter, that caused a huge problem. Oh my God, it had to be 20 years ago, probably further, probably before you even started working for the Standard Times. And it was a front page newspaper, and it showed a riot, quote unquote.
Yeah.
What it was is, the photographer shot it wide.
Yeah.
And either the photo editor
brought it in,
and it looked like a massive riot when it was only like 9 kids in this massive parking lot.
Right.
So you also have to deal with that kind of thing too.
Yeah, I mean, Okay, I'll give you an example that is similar to that, but not in making something out of nothing. Okay, but a riot is still a riot. I mean, but if you make it look like it's much bigger, then that's not fair either, right?
Exactly.
For the longest time, I wanted to do a piece on the heroin problem, right? Heroin is a problem not just in New Bedford, it's a problem worldwide, right?
Yeah.
There's huge amounts of this happening with a lot of addiction, and it's ruining people's lives.
Right.
Make it very long, very, very long. We're talking years, where I got nothing. And then one day, I happened to go into a house, and I went there because there was a veteran that lived there, and he was really mad at the VA hospital, right? So I was hanging out with him at this, residence, and I hear a noise in the kitchen. And the reporter was talking to this veteran, and I'm looking, and I'm like, I thought I was alone in this house besides the three of us.
Yeah.
So I decide to go to the kitchen, and as I get in there, there's another veteran shooting up heroin. So I ended up going back a whole bunch of times to document the absolute pain that this guy is going through. And what happened was we ran a piece. And it was a front page piece, and it was brutal. Because heroin is real.
Yeah.
And this is what happens.
Right.
And then at the time, the DA was Walsh. And he basically threatened to throw me in jail for being an accomplice to the crime. Yeah. The simple truth is, what I saw was what I saw. He wasn't doing anything for me. I caught him in the middle of the act.
Yeah.
And instead of turning my eyes away,
Right.
I decided to photograph this in the hope that people see the reality of what they're getting themselves into if they start heroin addiction.
Right.
Obviously, he never pressed any charges,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, the person in the photos ended up dying of an overdose not that long after that.
Yeah.
But that piece only ran in the paper because of other things, because ironically, the editor of the paper, who was Ken Harnett at the time, he kept on delaying the piece running, and then I understood why. He ran it on the last day that he was editor. Like that, there was nobody else to answer for it. Do you follow what I mean?
I understand exactly
And
what
it
you
took
mean.
a lot of courage from him to do it. It did, because there was no holding back.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were mad. They're like, I don't want to see this on my breakfast table. Yes, they're right. It's hard. But maybe that was an opportunity to reach to their kids and say, look, this is what it looks like to be addicted.
Right.
So, yes, I believe me, I understand. I understand when people get mad at something that they might see like that.
Right.
But that's the truth. This is what's happening. And ironically now, what are we talking about? The opioid addiction, right? How many people are overdosing?
It's still heroin. It's just legal heroin.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So you do this, and sometimes you know the repercussions of what is going to happen, because it might hit people when they're not expecting it.
Yeah.
And that is what it is.
I mean, and just as a quick aside too, you know, and I know the Portuguese are leading the world in dealing with this issue. It's, you don't shoot yourself up because you really want to.
No.
It's
As a matter of
you
fact,
need to. It's a disease.
Yeah.
It's
As a
an
matter of
illness.
fact,
Yeah.
that gentleman
Yeah.
who was a Vietnam veteran,
Yeah.
the one that I was just talking about, the headline was, I hate doing this, because that's what he said every single time.
Yeah.
I hate doing this, but he couldn't control himself.
But I mean, there are people who tried to quit smoking. It's
I know,
the exact
right?
same.
It's the exact same
It's the
thing.
exact same thing. Yes, the level is much
Right.
different. But you say, okay, one more. Oh yeah, the next one, and
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something.
Yeah.
But again, this goes way back to what we started the conversation with: is visual journalism, photography. It can reach anyone. It can speak to you, regardless on where you live on the planet. You don't need to read the caption when you look at someone shooting up, what it is that's happening. You don't have to.
What's the most dangerous thing you've ever done impulsively because you saw something that you knew you had to catch?
Well, I've had a couple of crazy run-ins with things, right? But I think Guatemala was a little out of whack. I mean, Guatemala is a beautiful place, but it's pretty lawless. So is Honduras. Actually, in Honduras, I heard that there was a town next door to where I was staying, up the road a little bit, that was like very, it was run by the gangs, right?
It was lawless, yeah.
It was lawless. So in these small towns, the priest is basically the mayor. So I convinced the priest into having me, someone drive me to this next town. And he's like, are you sure you want to go there? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure I want to go there. And so what happens? This guy picks me up the next day. I jump in the car. It was literally like 2 miles up the road, dirt road. We turn left onto the single street that this little town has, and there's a huge commotion in the middle of the street. I get right out of the car. I go straight into the middle of this thing with my cameras. I've never been there. Mm-hmm. It turns out everybody was going into this house. I go straight into this house. I know that sounds kind of like really weird, but...
You just went with the flow kind of thing?
I just went with the flow because I knew something was happening. Mm-hmm. I walk into the house. I turn the corner. On a bed is a guy with 3 bullet holes through his chest. Yeah. So I'm photographing this completely out of nowhere. And sometimes you wonder yourself, like...
Am I stupid or something?
Yeah, like, how did I get to this place, right?
Yeah.
And you just do it because you really care about something, right? Yeah. I mean, everybody talks about Honduras. Why do these people come here? Whatever.
Yeah, we're having an issue now.
I went there so I can discover for myself, why do these people come here? It turns out that the guy that was shot up was trying to come illegally to the United States. And the way it works is they have a coyote, and then the guy leads them, and supposedly they give him a lot of money, and then the guy brings them up to the border, right? Well, what happened was the other gang found out that this guy was going to go, so he surely has money. So when he got to the next town, they basically shot him up, took his money, and left him for dead, except the guy didn't die.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about. In Guatemala, I was there with a reporter, and we had come back from driving around, and we were hungry. We put the stuff in our the little house we were staying in, and we started walking down the street. As we're walking down the street to go to this little bodega thing at the bottom, I see this guy running towards us, and I push Becky up against the wall, and this guy had a gun, and he ran right by us. Now, the next day, we read that 3 people got killed up the street by a guy with a gun. Now, I don't know if this is the guy that did the shooting. Right. I don't know if this is a guy who was responding. I don't know. Right. But the world is not like we think it is. No. The world is a very interesting, dangerous place. Yeah. But then again, it is what it is.
I had my other brother work for Homeland Security, was involved with the aftermath immediately of 9/11, and would tell me that, you know, only half of what you hear is what's going on, is what's actually going on. Only 10% of what you are reading is right. Yeah, it's really a pretty nasty thing. Oh yeah, Peter, we could go on for a long time. Oh, this is great, but it is that time, and we're coming to the end of another podcast. One more question. Sure. Final question. What would you like to be remembered for?
Just being a storyteller. That's it. Just being a documentary of our time. No more, no less.
Are coffee table books passé, or are you going to publish something like that? Or is
I've done books. I've done books. Yeah. I did A Nossa Vida, ironically, which is a book about the Portuguese American. It's actually an English book with a Portuguese title, which I never really liked, but whatever. And I've done other publications. I mean, obviously, I've been published in everything from the New York Times to Time Magazine and everything in between. Mm-hmm. I have my website, peterpereira.com, so you guys can check that out. But I think in the future, I just want people to look at my photos and get a sense of what it was like living in the world, right? Between 2000, when I started professionally, or I was actually 98, but you get the point. Yeah. Till whenever. I mean, it's just a visual record of our time. Because let's face it, when you go and you look at a history book, right? And you flip through the pages, what's the first thing you look at? It's the photos. It's the drawings. It's the illustrations. Before you read anything, that's where you go to. Right. So I just want to be able to claim that I contributed a little bit to that.
And in one of those photographs, in a corner, in the middle, whatever, is going to be the answer, the key to a problem that people have been looking for, but you won't be around to hear that, hey, thanks.
That's right. It's funny. It's funny because, I mean, like I said earlier, it took a while to get to a place where people trusted that I had a unique set of skills, at least, right?
Yeah.
And for those of you who live in New Bedford, and if you want to look at my work, all you have to do is go to City Hall. A lot of people don't know that the entire third floor of City Hall, where the mayor's office is, if you just walk around the corridor, all those photos hanging on the wall, they're actually mine.
Wow, that's kind of cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So even if nothing else,
Yeah.
if I can claim that some things that I've done are representative of our city, I'm pretty happy.
That's great. That's great. Once again, I'm your host, Ron Fortier, and we want to thank our guest, Peter Pereira, photographer, let's go for it, extraordinaire, and photojournalist extraordinaire. And until the next time, be good, be kind, be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Ron.
You're welcome.
There you go.